we get asked a lot about diversity in our speakers. So here we got a very diverse panel. So
my favorite topic.
But it is a challenge, especially in biopharma. Less so, it seems less so in health tech, medical devices. I imagine if you were, depending on the area, the technical area, it could be more or less difficult. But I mean, why I was really interested in this topic after talking to you was just the idea that you could look outside your narrow technical area to hire into your team. Which, hadn't occurred to me actually, because I've never tried to start a business probably.
It's not uncommon though. I mean, entrepreneurs are busy trying to figure out how to make the science work and, get funding and think about, who will work for free initially.
Right. The idea of hiring anybody can seem like a fantasy at the start.
Right.
Or paying anybody, in fact.
Zach, you know that intimately, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
I hear. Great. So, people are going to keep signing on as we go. I think we should get started. I'll introduce us now. This is a panel on how to hire create a startup culture which is strong in diversity, equity, and inclusion, which, it seems like you see the topic pretty much everywhere you look in the news these days. And it does come up often in corporate culture and the startup world. And as we were just saying, it's the founders, if your most pressing problem is like, do I actually have a business here? It seems like, and how can I get funding? How can I grow? But many founders these days are aware that they want to grow their company into a larger entity, which will have a culture. In fact, it has the culture right from the start, and they may want to do the right thing and create this diverse culture, but they could release some pointers, which is why we're holding this event, just to explore the topic, get some different ideas. And so it's a panel discussion moderated by Tara Kochis here, who I don't know where she appears on your screen and my screen. She's on the right. She is president of Slone Partners, which is a recruitment firm for early stage life science and healthcare companies. She is president of Slone Partners, joined the company in 2004, bringing with her a decade of experience in healthcare. And she's actually working with a startup in our ecosystem, Bloomio, through her partnership with Springboard, which I gather is an organization which helps female founders. So Tara, a couple of years ago, gave a great talk on how to create a company culture at your startup. So we're really looking forward to what comes out of today's discussion. Tara, would you like to introduce the panel?
I would. In fact, no one introduces the panel better than themselves. So I'm going to do the honorable thing and defer that introduction to this great panel. And it is, it's a great representation. Zach is the CEO founder of Zibatics, the startup in the area. Stacey Solario is vice president and head of human resources for Curious. Behind her, you can see the name. Mary Stutz is senior vice president, corporate relations for Sumidavant Biopharma, also in the Bay Area, serving a global market. And Candice Norte is the executive director at Slone Partners. So I am going to ask them all to introduce themselves beyond their names and give a little color to why we invited them here today. And then we're just going to dive right in. So in order, Zach, I'm going to allow you to lead us in that endeavor. Great.
Yeah, so my background, I'm a scientist. I'm a PhD microbiologist, and I started Zibatics and with the scientific idea. And then, of course, a company had to follow that. And I learned very quickly that there's a lot more to it than just building the science in the lab. And so I am by no means an expert on this topic, and was indeed even a little hesitant to be part of the panel. But as an early company and doing a lot of thinking about it, I'm hoping to be able to share perspectives of how we've thought about it. As right now we're a company of 7, and what we're doing at the outset to try and set ourselves up to be a company truly committed to DEI.
Excellent, excellent. We know that. So thank you. Stacey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stacey Solorio, head of HR at Curious, over 15 years of experience in HR, all of it doing diversity and inclusion. Got to do a lot of the fun activities and joining employee resource groups, building diversity advisory boards at companies. Been in the biotech space now for about 7 years, working with small organizations who are just forming and getting commercialization into place and growing those companies into long-lasting organizations. Never have we thought that we needed to build our diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism program so early in our efforts as an organization, just starting out. But I do think this is a new social contract that we need to have these conversations. So I'm super excited to see, I think 45 people join, and even in companies as small as 7 people want to have this discussion, where I think in earlier years of my diversity days, we didn't even need to have conversations with small companies because they have plenty of other things to do, but it's no longer not an option to have these talks. So I'm super excited to share some of my experiences with this group.
Thank you. Excellent. Mary.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Stutz, and I am the SVP of Corporate Relations at Zibatics Biopharma, which is a startup. We launched in December 2019, but we are a parent to 5 companies, biopharma companies, and so we're very much focused on DEI. We have a Myrtle Potter, Black woman, who is the CEO, and so she definitely has been one of the folks who's very intentional about building a diverse workforce, and that's a key piece of diversity and inclusion, is being intentional about it. But prior to Sumitovan, I was the Chief Inclusion, Diversity, Health, Equity Officer for Stanford Healthcare, the first CDO that they ever had. The function didn't even exist, so having to build it from scratch was a very exciting opportunity. And I also have championed DEI at several companies, including Genentech, where I led their first diversity in clinical trials program. So the health equity piece is a huge piece for me. And also at Bristol Myers Squibb, United Health Group, at Comcast, NBC Universal, which is a little bit different company, but still the issues are all the same everywhere. But interestingly, at Comcast, I led the DEI work when they wanted to acquire NBC Universal, and they did acquire them, but the FCC mandated certain conditions around DEI in order to approve that mass purchase for the organization. And so leading that effort for the California region, which is the largest region, I would just say I started my DEI work at Kaiser Permanente, which I think is certainly at the forefront of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I started quite frankly, I was a part of the ambassadors in the task force that was employee task force that was asked to help explain this transition and transformation from anti-discrimination to diversity, and helping people to understand the significance of valuing the diversity of everyone, and everyone is diverse. It's not just about people of color, and we need to value everyone's diversity. It's really sad to see in this day that we're kind of having to go back to talk about anti-discrimination and anti-racism. And so we just have to be very diligent to not lose the progress that we've made over all these years. So I'm excited about this conversation.
Glad you're here. Thank you. Candice, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm so grateful that QB3 thought to have this platform today for this very important topic. As Tara mentioned, I am the Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Slone Partners. Prior to joining Slone Partners, I had the honor of being an educator for almost 20 years, serving in every role that you can have, from teacher to principal to director of elementary education. And every role has been about being an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and championing people who don't have a voice. And so joining Slone Partners was a no-brainer. I get the opportunity to support companies who are on their journey to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I also get to support students of color, Black and Latinx, who want to be in this great industry. So I'm really excited about the conversation today.
Great, great. Well, let's
Tara, sorry, can I just say one thing? We do welcome Q&A, and you can enter it in the Q&A field. Most questions we'll get to following the panel discussion, but if you have something that you think is totally relevant, I'll be watching it and I'll just pop in and introduce the question. So great, we'll have a panel discussion for maybe 30, 35 minutes and then open up for Q&A. Thanks.
And feel free to give us a little warning if we're going a little too long.
Okay,
so,
I will.
Perfect. And Casper was kind enough to share some of the questions that folks who might be attending or not able to attend today and looking forward to the recording, those questions were provided to us, some of them in advance. And so we're going to do our best today to incorporate answers into the questions that you took the time to submit in advance. So thank you everyone for thinking about this. Mary alluded to it, and we're just going to jump into it because Zach did too. And so to be present day, we're going to go back in time a little bit. Zach, you started Zibatics in 2016. What were the challenges around DEI then, and how did you address what you were embarking on back then?
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, I think that like the biggest challenge in terms of DEI for Zibatics at the outset was that we were, you know, two white male founders. And so like, as we thought about, you know, a small company, and then our first hire as well was another white male. He was a friend, you know, already in my network. And so then we were the sort of company of three, and, you know, pretty much the antithesis of what you would call diversity and inclusion. And, you know, and I think we were really concerned at that point, like what kind of company we were, what trajectory we were on. And so I think that what we did to address that was first and foremost to openly acknowledge that that was the company that we had at the moment, and really like thinking about how we wanted the company to grow and what foundation we wanted to set, even though at the moment we were not at all diverse from a racial or gender perspective, at least. And so, so, you know, just acknowledging that to begin with, and then really making a commitment, because we weren't in a position to really hire people at that time, or at least not very many, making a commitment to leveraging diverse contributions from vendors and some of the consultants we looked to source, as well as advisors that we appointed, early advisors to the company. And so that was opportunities for us to grow without like a traditional headcount, and bring in diverse perspectives and really start to lay the groundwork for having a more diverse perspective and conversation at the outset. And then, you know, of course, as we did start to hire, really making an effort to get outside of our network to not perpetuate kind of the starting point, and looking for a broader pool of people when we were making those early critical first hires, and really being able to draw from a big talent pool that was by definition going to be more diverse. And so with all those things, that's kind of how we started to correct what could have been a trajectory that could have been a lot harder down the road to get out of.
Great. We'll talk more about the specifics soon. When I first asked you the question, you talked about commitment, and I know Curious has also made a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, including that language into its code of conduct. How does that get actualized, Stacey? How do you carry that out in HR and throughout an entire organization, especially in growth mode?
Yeah, I think that was baseline for us. And so actually it's been a couple of years now that we put that code of conduct on our external page. A lot of companies will use that as an internal document with their employees, and it always covers the vendors and contractors and everyone, but they might not see it. And so putting that on our external page and making that available to everyone who does business with us was definitely our first step, inclusive of all the internal policies, to make sure that we don't have bias within the organization within our policies. I actually had to use that policy about a month ago with a vendor who unfortunately made comments about Black Lives Matter and how they didn't feel that it was something that they wanted to represent in their organization and partner with us on. And so they made some accusations against candidates within our organization who were African American. And that really had us put that policy in place and implement zero tolerance with that organization who was employing a half a dozen of our contract employees. And so we had to quickly pivot and find somebody who did meet the values within the organization, even though they were providing such a great service to us. We had to take a zero tolerance approach to it and say, this is not a relationship that we want to continue forward with, or that in which we feel even consultants feel that they're in a safe working environment and they know where Curious stands on that. And so I think that's a good first step, making sure that you have not only good internal policies, but those that you do business with also know where you stand as it relates to the code of conduct.
It's a great example. Yeah, I mean, it's really, it hits home, I think, for a lot of people to have that exposed and then take action. So good for you as that example. It'll be curious, and we'll come back to this, to talk about, how that gets communicated, or how you may even use that, or the education and empowerment that transcends into your organization. So, but before we get there, Mary, you talked about Sumitovant being an early stage 2-year company. Did you have DEI plans from day one? How did, it sounds like you did, of course, because of your leader, but was it informal or formal? And how,
Yeah, so definitely it was informal. So we were scrambling to get the company stood up. So from the perspective of starting with our values, and as a new startup, it was very critical for us for all of the leaders to reach agreement on the corporate values. And so there was a very intentional inclusion of diversity and inclusion as one of the core values of our organization, in addition to getting therapies to patients and doing robust science and all of those pieces. So from that perspective, it certainly was front of mind. It was not an afterthought. And then again, it's interesting how diverse the organization actually is. We have over 43% of our leaders are female and diverse. And it's interesting because we are a Japanese owned company. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of Sumitomo Dainippon. And so the fact that so we say we're a startup, but we're a $3 billion startup, because that's what that's what it costs to put all of these companies together. But I think even Sumitomo Dainippon was very committed to diversity, in that they asked Myrtle to be the CEO. It's not like she had to go apply for the position. They asked her because she has such a stellar reputation as a CEO, and knowing how to build companies, having been the COO and president at Genentech and a president at Bristol Myers Squibb, and then running her own consulting practice for so many years for CEOs of major companies like Merck and all these others. So they sent a very strong message about their commitment to DEI. And then as I think that I have to confess, we probably attracted a large applicant pool of diverse people who were quite frankly very interested in coming to work for a diverse CEO. That's certainly how she was able to lure me away from Stanford, because I loved what I was doing at Stanford. So I wasn't looking for a new job, but that opportunity to be a part of something, not only a new and exciting company, but a company that is making inroads and blazing trails by putting diverse people in senior level positions. And so that's how ours evolved. And again, every place is different. I do think as so I always talk about the multi-generational workforce. That is the workforce of the future and really the workforce of today. And so you look at all these generations and our upcoming Gen Z and Gen Y and all these, they want to work in diverse organizations that have diverse people, and they're hoping that are approaching problem solving and innovation a different way. But also, I think the unique thing about startups is that you have the opportunity to not just come to work, but to be heard, because it is so small. Like Zach said, 7 people. Yeah, hey, if you have an idea about something, let's hear it. Let's go for it. And it's the same way at Summit Event. It was the same way for me at Bayer when I joined there as they launched their biotech business unit in Berkeley. And, we built it from scratch. So that's the other piece that I think gives startups really more of an edge, quite frankly, I think, than the big companies, because of that interest in being seen, being heard, being valued, feeling that they're belonging, having a voice. That's the unique opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's really great. I think one of the follow-up thoughts that I would have is, let's say, we're not a diverse organization today, right? And to think about, where do we go to increase our network? Where do we go to increase diversity within our world, practically, pragmatically, And so I'm going to come back to you, Mary, with that question, because I think this audience will want to hear, how you suggest people do that at the board level to, finding people who might be at the bench. And so I think that's going to be where I'm going with that. Before we get there, though, Candice, just curious, not that I've ever heard it before, I might have, but how has your background prepared you to help early stage companies construct a DEI strategy? What building blocks do you always recommend to early stage companies?
Sure, great question. Well, for those that I've been lucky enough to work with, most of my stories come from education, because as one of the other panelists mentioned, DEI is not industry specific, right? We're all sort of tackling and wrestling with the same sort of issues and concerns. So that's one, that it's not industry specific. But also, I think as an administrator and a school leader, you build really good listening skills as you listen to parents and teachers and other stakeholders. You actually are really working more with adults than kids when you're at the leadership level. And I think the higher I went, the more I realized I need to really grow this muscle in working with adults. And so I think that makes me primed to work with companies because they're adults. And then also, I just love professional development. I've always been a lifelong learner as an educator. I love designing professional development, delivering it, being a part of it. And so I think at the basic foundation of DEI, there has to be some understanding and learning. And I think sometimes that gets a bad name because, oh, that training didn't work, or, that doesn't work, but you have to understand. And I love the question already that was put in the chat, where a participant wants to know, what is the definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion? So there's always this opportunity for us to need to learn and understand at the foundation. A few other basic building blocks for me, and many of the panelists shared it. You need to have a vision and a kind of it doesn't have to be perfect, but once you embed that vision into your company values, I think it sends a message to everyone that this is what we believe in. And so if I'm starting out and I need some basic things, number one, what are your values? And communicate that to everyone in the organization. I'd say number two, think about some short goals and some long goals, right? It's a journey. Nothing's going to be perfect. It's not going to be easy, but it's definitely something worth going after. And the last little funny story I'll tell about that is I remember my superintendent did not think social media worked. He did not tweet. He didn't like Facebook. He didn't like anything. And he had a young millennial that was the head of PR that was getting her doctorate. And she wrote her whole dissertation around social media. And he was a changed man. All of a sudden, he's tweeting, branding, doing all of these things around the power of social media. And so now it's a part of the organization. And that's how DEI has to be. It can't be this separate thing that lives over there. It has to be a strategy, just like branding, just like social media, just like marketing. It's that important.
Great points and great ideas.
Can I ask though, as somebody who comes from certainly a place of ignorance, I'm with the audience. I'd love to hear a definition of diversity, equity, inclusion, because they all sound like the same thing at first. How are they different? What does each mean?
Yeah, that's very interesting, and it's something that those of us focused in the DEI work, and Candice, certainly feel free to jump in. this is something that we're always having to explain to people. So as I do work with organizations, it's always so important to help them understand that diversity is about having a diverse workforce. But that's just the beginning. You can't stop at hiring a diverse workforce, because what we've found more and more now is companies hire a diverse workforce and they kind of check the box and they think they're done. But they have no, if they're not really checking and looking to find out, they have no idea what's the real experience of that diverse workforce. And so you look at inclusion. So inclusion means that, yes, I work here, but you want to find out, do I feel valued, celebrated, respected? Do I have access to the same opportunities as everyone else? That gets into equity. Am I being treated the same as everyone else? And then when you go even further into equity, it is about opportunity. I'm a diverse employee. Are our diverse employees being promoted and advanced at the same rate as everyone else? Are they getting increases? Some research that I've done for different clients will show that diverse employees consistently get a meets expectations or satisfaction, or whatever the word is, satisfactory performance. And so while non-diverse folks exceeds expectations. And so you might think it's not a big deal, but your raise is based on that. So if I get satisfactory or meets expectation, I'm going to get a 1% raise. But the people over here getting exceeds expectation, they're getting 4% raise. And so if you look at that over time, if you're not looking at it over time, you're going to have folks who are just not equitably paid at all. And if you're not doing the market assessments that you should be doing, companies that are at the top of the list for best places to work for diversity will do those evaluations and check to see, are our people being paid at the market rate for their job and what they do, and across the board. So that's an example of what we mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion. And all three of them are super important, and they are separate things, and diversity is just the beginning.
Mary, I'll just add one little quick thing. At Slone, we came up with a whole mantra that says, don't stop at D, right? Because if you just stop there, then, that person is doing all the things that you experience, or they become a token, or they feel like a token, that they've only been hired for that. And so I know that there's probably time later to talk about that a little bit more, but you absolutely have to think about how to nurture, mentor, and grow your diverse workforce so that they feel like they belong. And so it's more than just having representation. We absolutely value that because it helps with decision-making, innovation, and all the data is there on the business side. But we don't want people to leave our companies because we haven't nurtured them. We haven't shown them that there's a pathway to promotion.
Mm-hmm. And I think what we've seen over the last year or so is the additional letter, A, anti-racism, or J for justice. And it's such a unique opportunity as you think about where we came from history and having all this feel-good stuff around DEI and having that grow and develop, right? It was diversity and inclusion. Then it became diversity, equity, inclusion. Now it's diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. And what that anti-racism does, it no longer lets people come into the back seat. And now it's about being proactive and being an activist and doing something. It's an actionable word, anti-racism. What are you doing? So I think it's really growing, and it's that social contract that I talked about in the beginning where you can't show up anymore without having these things in place. It's like working in Silicon Valley where there's snacks in the kitchen. That's just expected. Now candidates and employees are asking you, what is your plan? What are you doing? They want to know that this is part of your organization, or they will find somewhere else that has these specific measures already in place.
Tell us more about that, Stacey, because, at Curious, I'm assuming that you've done some work around empowering your folks, but how does that really show up at work? How, what can the audience take away that they can be doing differently that empowers people around social justice and prevents the proliferation of anti-racism or racism or bias against groups of people?
I think there's a couple things. One, you need to meet people where they're at. And I'll be the first to say that I've grown in the last 20 years around my own views. And so trying to put somebody into where you're at as these topics exist is not the right approach. You got to meet them where they're at in their education, in their knowledge. So find out where your employees are. I have a specific leader who said, I don't want this as part of the organization. That sits outside. We got work to do. We got patients to save. And it's making sure that they understand how this does fit into the business plan. So meeting employees and leaders where they're at is really important. And then it's also creating that safe place for people to talk and be authentic about it. And so a couple of the things that we do is we have these tea in the cloud where anyone can show up and talk to the CEO. I have afternoon coffee breaks with HR where people can come and talk about where they're thinking that there are concerns within the organization. So if people have a safe place to talk about these things, and it's not necessarily through an anonymous survey, right, where they can really get real about these conversations, I think that's a great place. When I kicked off the Diversity Advisory Board back in January, half the company showed up. Half. I was so surprised. The only thing we did in that hour was just find out what people wanted from this group. And that was a great place to start. And so I think you need to create the safe environment and then meet people where they're at in this journey.
That's great. Zach, I know last summer you and the company made a commitment to anti-racism. Tell us more about that. Specifically, talk about how you do it on a shoestring budget.
Yeah, definitely. So, I love a lot of things that Stacey just said around sort of like creating a safe place to talk and really just opening up the conversation more than anything. And I think that is really what we focused on. And so we made this sort of commitment to diversity and anti-racism. And, we met and we talked about what we wanted to accomplish with it. And then we wanted to put something down on paper, figuratively, that we could then, publish and be a focal point, both to hold us accountable and, be a motivator to act beyond just sort of say like, in concept, we think DEI is great. Like, have something that like really we could act on. And so it kind of, is anchored on 4 key kind of commitments, like a commitment to action, a commitment to amplifying diverse voices, a commitment to education, and a commitment to diversity. And so with the action, it was around, opportunities for the company to donate to causes or organizations we thought were really helping in terms of racial justice, and as well as matching any employee donations. But then beyond that, and of course, those donations, as you mentioned, are on, we have a limited budget. And so we acknowledge that like what we could contribute now, and that we hope that it would just set a precedent for later when we could contribute more. But the things we could do that were free were like having quarterly events, like volunteering or education events, or kind of employee working days, where we were really dedicated to learning more. And then a couple of opportunities to support things like internships or community events that we could, these are all things that we could do for free. And then in terms of amplifying voices, it was like around social media, as you mentioned, and the opportunities to sort of like amplify diverse voices and celebrate diverse scientists and thinkers. Again, this is something that's can be done for free, and is really about making it okay to kind of have these conversations and really saying to our team that these are things that we want to talk about, and that are okay to bring up, and just get us all thinking about it, and then taking a public stance of publishing our that commitment. And then for education, one of the things we do is have an internal newsletter that we publish every month and send out to the team. And it just has resources for education, interesting articles, opportunities to volunteer, things like that. And again, this sort of sets a tone of like, this is something that we're committed to keeping in the forefront of our conversations, so that it's not something that just kind of falls off the radar as other. And doing anti-bias training and other events like that. And then for diversity, that is the hiring and, you know, vendor selection and things like that. But as spoken before, this is sort of like, that's just kind of like the beginning. That's like, or one step or one opportunity. And particularly for a company that doesn't hire a lot, it's, you know, that obviously couldn't be the major focal point for a commitment like that. So those are the ways that we've tried to start getting things moving and really just creating a culture, a team culture where this is not a token sort of gesture, but something that we can actually focus conversation on.
Tara, I want to say you're doing a great job moderating. I love how you're distributing the questions. It occurred to me, we want to make our audience feel included too. And people have very practical questions. And I think maybe we should just address these questions as they come in. And I mean, it's gonna generate a lot of responses. So if you don't mind, the first question we had was from someone whose initials are AMR. How do I recruit and reach historically marginalized people and communities with job openings? And they say, I think I found some good resources, but I wish I had more. So how do you reach those communities with your job openings?
You know, that's one of the questions I get asked probably the most. Like in preparing for this talk, I was thinking when I meet with clients, what do they ask? And it's a lot around recruiting and expanding the network. And, you know, I think Zach's opening about how, you know, he started with a friend who knew a friend, and then they thought, well, wow, when we grow more, we need to be more intentional. So one of the ways that I help our clients think about recruiting and reaching communities is to actually come up with a strategy to expand your network. Join an organization, and honestly, because of the pandemic, everything has gone virtual. There are so many virtual conferences that are dedicated towards women and people of color that you can join, and you can write to the presenters or participants afterwards. There are so many groups on LinkedIn, Meetup, Facebook that are dedicated to women in pharma, Black scientists. There's a whole hashtag movement going on right now on Twitter, hashtag Black in Neuro, hashtag Black in Science, hashtag, and you can engage and reach out to and start to expand your network in order to recruit. I also think that sometimes we're very narrowly focused on where we recruit and very pedigreed, right? So, or we think that the only place to go is HBCUs. And though I love all the attention that the HBCUs are getting, it's about time. 90% of Black people attend PWIs. So there are tons of Black talent, Latinx, people of color, women all over the country that are sort of untapped because they don't go to a certain school or they don't meet a very narrowly focused criteria. Lastly, and I'll pass to anyone else who wants to chime in, I think when I look at job descriptions, sometimes I think people are out right off the bat because of the job description. And I think that I became a principal at 30. And if they had looked at number of years or number of, a very short list, I would not have had the opportunity to lead a school, and I did it quite well. So I think we need to look at our job descriptions, and we need to think about transferable skills. In particular, in areas of like legal, finance, business, there are a ton of people of color and women who can serve in those roles. And though we have some talent pool pipeline work to do around maybe some more specific science roles, the other roles should be an all-day no-brainer pool for people of color and women to have access to.
I would just add, I'm sorry, was somebody else going to say anything?
Oh, no, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm going to back out now, but Tara, maybe you're good with reading these questions, and then I don't, people can just ask you and you can direct it to the right place.
Tara, I'll keep track of the questions for you.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
thank you.
I can do that. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, we often hear that there's no pipeline, and that's a big thing, especially when I'm working with academic institutions and other organizations, especially like those that are the more highly skilled, required, that they need more highly skilled folks for their organization, and they always talk about pipeline. And I remember having this conversation, like at Stanford and other organizations, and where especially for the physicians and faculty and all that, and they're saying, well, we need a pipeline for diverse candidates. And the truth of the matter, if you look at the research, is that the majority of people hired in those organizations are hired because they know somebody. So what you're really saying, just like what Zach said, because you know somebody. But what you're really saying when you say that there's no pipeline, what you're really saying is, I don't have a diverse personal network, because these are personal. So it's the information that Candice put out there is absolutely spot on for companies. When you're recruiting, you need to go to all these different venues. But at the end of the day, the person making the decision on whether somebody's going to get hired or not, it's typically, a lot of times it's because they know them or they know somebody connected to them. So my advice to everybody is diversify your own personal network. So if you're a Black person and everybody in your network is Black, that's a problem. If you're white and everybody in your network is white, it's a problem. If you're a Latinx and everybody's Latinx, if you're Asian and they're all like, we have to immerse ourselves in other cultures if we are truly going to live the promise and the capabilities of being a truly diverse and inclusive society. And we have to start right here with looking in the mirror. Number one, what am I doing? What am I doing as an individual? How am I diversifying my own personal network? How am I practicing cultural empathy? We had great programs at Comcast NBC Universal as far as requirements for the leaders. They had individual DEI goals, and then the organization had corporate goals, and the regions had regional goals. And a lot of that had to do with recruitment and retention. But the individual goals of all the director level and above folks, that's really where the rubber hits the road. And they were required to be active in a diverse organization, to be on a board that is servicing diverse populations. Even at Stanford, with our employee resource groups, we made a point of making sure that our C-suite level folks became sponsors of the employee resource groups, but not their own affinity. They had to become sponsors of ERGs that they were not at all, it was not their ethnicity, their nationality, their gender, anything, because we need to focus on giving our leaders those opportunities, and not just our leaders, our employees. That's why doing things in the community, being active in the community with organizations, all of that is going to give your leaders and your employees the opportunity to immerse themselves into other cultures so that we can gain more cultural empathy. We were just having a conversation today on our huddle about the Asian hate crimes. And so this was something that we talked about, and I was sharing about this. The cultural empathy piece is huge. And so it is upon us to make sure that we are learning and immersing ourselves in other cultures. We are helping our children to do that. What are you looking at your kid? We got to start with, going younger and younger, because, grandma may not do it, but you can bring your diverse friends around grandma and expose her to them. And you can make sure your children have diverse playmates when they're doing play dates and things like that. We have to be much more aggressive about immersing ourselves in other cultures, or we're not going to see the hatred and the prejudice and the racism abate. Because once you really get to know somebody and become friends with that person, network with that person, then you will gain that empathy, and it will help alleviate all the biases and the unintentional things that people are doing to promote the lack of inclusion.
Right on. Thank you for that. And I think that answers a lot of questions that people were thinking about in terms of, expanding the network. And I'm assuming, Mary, that you're talking about this at all levels,
Yes.
in organizations. This doesn't change for the type of role people are going after, whether it's a board position, an advisor position, which level, everything in between, right?
That's exactly right. Boards are having to do the exact same thing, because that is really where you hear there's no pipeline. Or with boards, they are, or if they are hiring diverse people, it's the same diverse people on every board. And so it's like, okay, there are really more folks than that in this country. But people need the access. They need the invitation. So for example, Tara and I, when I first started advising with Slone Partners, I talked about how shocked I was at the numbers of African-American executives, highly skilled people who do not have an executive recruiter in their network. I got a whole bunch. But, so, I mean, that's just something you're supposed to do, but they had none. So the opportunity to connect them to people like Tara and Slone Partners, that's something that I see myself as doing, as a part of sending the elevator back down to help other people up. And so when it comes to boards, they are realizing they're going to have to do a different job of recruiting board members and looking for board members. And there's a new urgency around DEI right now is with the National Association of Corporate Directors. They just released the results of their 2021 survey of the trends and priority areas, the top 5 for boards and corporations. And these are the things that they believe they need to improve and their ability to oversee their businesses effectively. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is front and center. It's the number one thing for so many organizations as a result of the heightened social expectations from consumers following what happened last summer, the protest against racial injustice, but also stakeholder groups, including large institutional investors, are demanding greater accountability for and disclosure on organizations' DEI efforts. And so the board has to be at the forefront of making sure that that is happening and providing that oversight. And there's 43% of the respondents feel that their boards don't dedicate enough time for the oversight of the organization's diversity and inclusion work. So these are things that they're finding out as they're talking to each other and figuring out what the priorities should be. And then they're also beginning to look for ways to bring the benefits of the diversity of the board level itself and what that means. And more than a quarter of the respondents indicated that more time should be dedicated to listening to diverse voices in the boardroom, and 28% want to allocate more time to expand the diversity of management voices presenting to the board, who's coming into the room. So organizations are going deeper and understanding that their role is to not only decide they want to do it, but to make it happen. So for example, NACD has just launched a program with the US Chamber of Commerce to specifically increase the numbers of Black men and women on boards. And as they were rolling this out, people asked, well, don't you already have these programs? Well, yes, we do have the programs, but even some of the organizations Tara and I work with, How Women Lead, we were very involved with in California getting the 2020 Women on Boards, the legislation passed that Governor Brown passed. But what we found was that the majority of people benefiting from all of that, same thing NACD found, was white women. And so people were saying they were calling that diversity. And so you still weren't seeing Black people, Latino people, Asian people being put into these roles. And so this gets back to being intentional. And you have to be intentional about what you're going to do. And that is now what the NACD has done with the US Chamber of Commerce, that they are specifically intentionally recruiting African Americans. Santa Clara University has a Black Corporate Board Readiness Program because, the other thing is because there has not been the access. You can't just put people in roles and not prepare them and train them and make sure you're setting them up for success. So these corporate board readiness programs, and I'm working with several, the NASDAQ is saying that they're voting on it, and we're pretty sure it's going to pass, that they want X number of diverse folks on the boards of directors. Governor Newsom came back and passed specific legislation to augment what Governor Brown did to say we not just diverse people, but we actually want people of color on boards and to mandate that. So these are the same things you're going to have to do in your corporations. You're going to, and I'm not talking about quotas, but at the end of the day, if you have two equally qualified candidates, because I get very annoyed when first thing people say when you talk about diversity is, well, they got to be qualified. Well, everybody's got to be qualified to get a job. So that you don't even need to say that. Why are you saying that? That's a bias right there. But nevertheless, we're talking about two equally qualified people, candidates, and if the person hiring them is not a diverse person, 9 times out of 10, they are going to hire the person who looks like them, who they feel most comfortable around. So that's why you don't see a lot of the movement. So you have people complain about, oh, we have a diverse slate of candidates, and they set that goal for every opening, have a diverse slate of candidates. But then they don't set a goal for how many times you want to hire a diverse candidate. So you know, the people on those committees are like, yeah, I'm tired of doing this. We have the diverse candidates, we rate them, and then they never get hired. So you have to have that accountability and that intentionality around hiring diverse people, and you have to learn to be comfortable around diverse people. We have to be comfortable around each other. We've got to do it. That's why the dialogues that we were just talking about, that Zach was talking about, and we're all talking about, that Stacey was talking about, are critical so that we just get comfortable talking to each other and being around each other.
See, how, you know, just out of curiosity, how do you check that implicit bias? How do you, you know, educate your teams to, you know, make the best decisions possible, especially when you're starting out? Because one of the questions people are talking about is, how do entrepreneurs ensure that they're hiring diverse talent who are also balancing the needs to hire quickly, efficiently, and low recruitment costs? So how does that all come together practically as you're building a company?
Yeah, I think Candice said it well earlier as well. It's like making sure it's ingrained within your culture. And it's not this thing that's set up on the side and you have this extra goal that you're trying to have. So when I talk to my team, even within recruiting, about making sure that we have ways in which we're looking for this implicit bias, it's not make sure that you have, you know, one female candidate to every male candidate, and you're checking those boxes. It's making sure you're watching what's happening around you. And even making sure that when people put job descriptions together, I had one last week that came through that said, I wanted somebody from an accredited university. Well, what does that mean? And why does it have to be accredited university? We even really neutralized all of our job descriptions to not have genders in them, and it's they, them. And that just creates another way in which you can create inclusion. So making sure it's the fabric of your organization and not something that's tacked on and layered on. And it's about training, right? It's giving people the skills to look for these things, because we all have biases, right? We all have them. It's making sure that they're not showing up in the organization, and it's training people on how to look for them, and making sure that we're holding each other accountable for when that woman gets passed up with her great idea, but all of a sudden Bobby comes around and has the same thing that he's saying that was a great idea earlier by a female within the room, acknowledging and saying, oh yeah, that's what Susie said earlier. And so it's making sure that we're practicing this within the organization and giving people the skills to what to look for to make sure that it's not showing up in a way that is disproportionate within your organization. So I think training is a big part of it, and making sure that people have the tools that they need in order to ensure it doesn't show up in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, just to jump on that a little bit, like, totally agree that I think one of the key points that resonate for me is, you know, as a small team, you know, as I think Mary said earlier, you know, we kind of have an advantage that we all get to be kind of part of the conversation. And then it's, I think, like, just being honest with the fact that acknowledging the biases that we all have, as you said, Stacey, like just being like, yeah, like, you know, I think initially the response is, I know I had this, was like, oh, I'm not biased, like, you know, and of course you are, like, of course I am. You know, of course we all are. And so really, and sometimes you don't even really know often, even after you've acknowledged it, how you're going to be biased, like how that's going to manifest itself. But just being like really honest and open about that conversation, like as we're hiring, really thinking like, and just double checking, like, is there bias seeping in here? Because we definitely are going to be biased in this process. And so then and just constantly kind of referring to that and revisiting that at every step of the process, and really like looking as the process is going along. And I think, you know, at a small company, you have the ability to do that because, you know, a lot of people in terms of percentage of the company can be involved in that process and really kind of check each other. And so I think for, you know, the small companies out there, and thinking about how we can, you know, definitely expand the network is like the first thing, right? The first bias you have is that we're just drawing from a small pool of people if we just go to the people we know. And so being really conscious about that. And then as the process of hiring goes along, just continuing to ask yourself, like, why do I like this person? Like, why is it that I think this person is better than somebody else? And then just trying to be, and really, like, my co-founder and I are in a hiring process right now, and really like just directly asking each other this, like, why do we think that this person is better, and really asking ourselves that, and forcing ourselves to say those things out loud and make sure that there aren't sort of biased reasons for it.
Absolutely. I know there's some questions mounting. So I think in our last couple of minutes, we're going to go ahead and tackle those. Sound good? Okay. So in order, I'm just going to read these. What is in place for colleagues who demonstrate racism, interpersonal microaggressions toward fellow colleagues, and could the training be ongoing to stall DEI as a journey, not a destination, I believe? People bring their primary socialization with them wherever they go. So the question in there is, what do you suggest that people put in place for colleagues? You know, it's one thing when somebody in the hierarchy or the leadership models that behavior, but colleague to colleague, peer to peer, what recommendation do you have in terms of how that gets handled, especially microaggressions?
Yeah, well, one of the things, that I talked about again with the kind of 3 things you can do as an individual to address this, and I already talked about diversifying your network, and the other one is being an ally, but the third one is become an upstander, and that grows out of the whole bystander intervention concept that happened during the Me Too movement, actually, of empowering people to speak up if they see someone being harassed, so that the onus isn't just on the victim to deal with it and to report it. So then now, as things got worse instead of better after Me Too, with all the next phase of social issues, this whole concept of being an upstander. So that means empowering the people in your organization when you see somebody being overlooked, experiencing microaggressions and bias, people just being rude and insensitive. Speak up and say something. Say something to the perpetrator, and even be willing to report it to HR, because again, a lot of times folks just are so victimized and so worried about losing their job that they just take it and they won't say anything. So that's why it's so important, this whole concept of being an upstander and holding each other accountable. It's no one person's responsibility for DEI, it's the whole organization. Stacey, I think you were going to say something.
I was just going to say one other thing is that when you have a training that allows safe space to talk about that, because we do all have biases, the microaggressions, even if you've been trained, are likely going to happen. I think being able to have that conversation and let people know that. I think people always think of the worst movie they've ever seen when they think of racism. And since they're not that, they're like, well, I don't do microaggressions and I'm not, there's none of that. But it's the everyday subtle little things that really can cause psychological harm. And so when we give people the tools through training, role playing, and the space to say this likely will happen, you can be an upstander, but you also can have that sort of culture where, man, that bias creeped in and I'm able to call you out on that and you can receive it, because the person receiving it is also a big part of us growing in our, anti-racism.
Cultural humility, being able to accept that you made the mistake and to, apologize and move on. Don't throw yourself under a bus.
Learn from it. Yep. Zach, I know we have more questions, but has that happened at Zibatics? If it's 2 folks who are working side by side, did one of them ever come to you? Is there an example? Not that I want to, call out anyone, but maybe you could draw upon some experience to suggest, like, how do you create that safe space, especially in a small company where everybody's going to be like, well, I know it was you.
Yeah. It's hard. I was just thinking about this, and without a doubt, I'm positive that it has happened at our company. I don't have any specific examples of it. That being said, I have no doubt that people at our company have felt that way, and those things have come up. And I think that the main thing that we try to create just generally is a culture where people feel comfortable and safe expressing themselves. And so really trying to take the lead and model when, as Mary said, like humility and admitting, for instance, when I've done something wrong or spoken over somebody or misattributed or all kinds of things. And trying to create a place where it's okay to bring those things up, and really encourage and reward when somebody does demonstrate bravery and kind of bringing something up that diversity, inclusion, or otherwise, that maybe is a hard thing to say. And so that's what we've tried to do in creating a kind of an open conversation. You know, I'm sure that, you know, if you ask my employees, there's probably places where we've still failed a lot, but that's what we're trying to do at the very minimum.
Casper's back.
Yeah, well, I like to acknowledge that we're at the top of the hour, so people don't feel like we're gonna go on, or if they have to leave. I mean, people make time in their schedule and so on. We continue to get some comments. I think people have really appreciated this discussion today. It's amazing. Like, you just open it up, and all of a sudden, wow, there's all these things that you hadn't thought of, all these aspects, and that's why it's been really nice to have a panel, actually. So we have everybody's permission to have recorded this. We'll likely be posting this on our website in the same registration page where the webinar was listed. If you have any additional resources, I know a number of these questions have been like, okay, well, what do I do? Where do I find resources to help me hire and so on? If you have tips, if you have links, please send them to me and I can put them on the website on that web page.
Thank you, Casper.
And
so, because we do have at some partners we've generated and cultivated some lists, and happy to share.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for taking part. It's been very interesting, and I guess it's to be continued, right? We'll keep on developing. Thanks very much, everybody.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.